and then hopefully we may have another couple folks join us later, and if not, we will have the recording and we'll send that out to all the members so that they can have the benefit of the presentations today. So for those of you who may not know me, and Tawanda and Daryl, I've not met you two personally, but I'm Pam Cashwell, the secretary here at the Department of Administration, and really, really appreciate both of you taking the time to be with us this morning, because I know you have extraordinarily busy schedules. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody else for giving us the benefit of your time and attention as well. So I want to start this morning by introducing a new staff member here at DOA who will be working with you all on the commission, and that is Jordan Hanna. Jordan is a program and policy assistant. She's working with Evan Grant, and comes to us from the Durham County DA's office, where she was working with the Special Victims Unit, and is a fairly recent graduate. Anything, Jordan, within 5 years for me is a recent graduate of Appalachian State University. And Jordan is our new person who will be working with all of our boards and commissions, from an administrative and technological and all things boards and commissions, helping us with ensuring that we have full boards and members and all of that sort of thing. And so, Jordan, welcome. If you can give a wave so everybody knows who you are.
Hi, everyone.
Jordan is great, and you will enjoy working with her and getting to know her. And so really, we're excited to have her on board and filling of what has been a very huge void for us. So I am going to dispense with, I'm using some executive privilege here, and I'm going to dispense with a roll call because we can see who all is on. And so, Jordan, if you will just do the roll based on names, and we had already gone through who we anticipated being on, and that is we can see that those folks are on. So I'm going to actually dispense with that, but and actually I'm going to have to dispense with approval of the minutes, since we do not quite have a quorum. We're close now, but I'll come back to that later on in the meeting if we get one more person who joins us. And Evan just sent me a message saying that we do have another person joining late, so we'll do that further on down the agenda. And so this will help actually our esteemed guests who are with us today, Tawanda Foster Artis, who is the General Counsel for the North Carolina Community Colleges System Office. We are thrilled to have Tawanda with us. I know that I don't have her bio in front of me, but I know that she has a very esteemed background and came to community colleges from the Department of Justice, I believe. Is that right? David is saying no. Where were you before?
So I call it my state government tour.
Okay.
I started my career as a prosecutor, moved on to DOJ with David for about 7 years, went over to AOC for a few years, and most recently came from the legislature to the Community Colleges System Office.
Awesome. Okay. I knew DOJ was in there somewhere. Thank you for that, Tawanda, and thank you for being with us. And you know what I asked both Tawanda and Daryl to do is provide us an update on what are we talk about all the time, what state government agencies are doing in the DEI space. And so wanted to get an update on what interesting work the community colleges and the universities are doing, so that we can learn from any best practices that they may be operating under at this time. And so, Tawanda, I'm going to turn it over to you. You have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Secretary Cashwell, for having me today. If I can, I will share my screen. Let's see. Let's just jump right in. So I thought it would be best if I started off with a little bit of history about the community college system. I find in my work as a state, we know what the community colleges are, but not a lot of people understand the structure and how we came into being. So in 1957, the Community College Act was passed, and it was to initiate and develop a system of state-supported community colleges. At that point, we were under the State Board of Higher Ed. After some study, we were merged with a set of technical and vocational schools that were also created. And in 1963, the General Assembly created what became the system and now the system office. But we were still under State Board of Ed. In 1980, we became a standalone state agency and are now one of the third largest community college system in our nation. Here's a quick look at what we call our community college family. We have 525,000 students currently. We have at times had upwards of 700,000 students. There are 58 colleges across the state. There is a community college pretty much within 50 miles of any location of the state, in the state. 58 presidents over the 58 colleges, 770 local trustees. We have oversight at the system office and the state board level, but in a very limited and different way than the university system. When fully staffed, we have 230 employees in the system office, and currently there are 22 state board members. So let's talk for a minute about our governance structure, because here's where we really differ from the university system and where I find people don't know how we work. So the State Board of Community Colleges does have some oversight of the community colleges, but not in the way that the UNC Board of Governors does. We are limited by the provisions largely in Chapter 115D of the General Statutes and the State Board Code, which is our administrative code. Many years ago, we had our code provisions or administrative rules in the North Carolina Administrative Code. Around 2015, the State Board decided that they wanted to do their own rulemaking and control their code themselves. And so the State Board of Community Colleges Code was developed. It resides on our community college's website. We do all of the rulemaking in-house, and that is one of my functions as general counsel in our legal affairs department, is to do that rulemaking, to do the petitions, the drafting, the public comment, and public hearings for rulemaking. So unless it is an administrative rule under our state board code or a requirement under state law and our general statutes, we do not have any other oversight over the community colleges. And I think that's where people are really surprised a lot of times. The system office staff works to affect the policies implemented by the state board. And we also have a supportive function to the community colleges. So it's very interesting that we support and advise community colleges, but we do not have ultimate authority or oversight over many of them. Most community colleges are controlled by their local board of trustees, that group of 770 across the state. The other thing that's unique about the community college system is we maintain an open door admission policy. Essentially, no one is turned away from a community college. If you can't read when you apply to community college, we teach you to read. We do remediation. As long as you are at least 18 years of age and or have graduated from high school or have some high school equivalency, you may attend community college. And in many cases, we will help you with the GED or high school equivalency so that you can begin community college. As well, we are mandated by our Constitution to remain as close to free as possible. On January 11th of 2021, in the pandemic, all the years run together now, but it was January 11th of 2021, President Thomas A. Stiff III became the 10th president of the community college system. As part of his platform and vision for the community college system, he developed this 3-point vision, or the 3 pillars, as he calls them sometimes, to govern his work here. The first was to become the first choice for affordable higher education in North Carolina. Many times people talk about the community college system as being the best kept secret in North Carolina. We do not consider that a compliment. We don't want to be the best kept secret. We want everyone to know about the good work that happens here and that it is a wonderful choice for affordable higher ed in our state. President Stith also seeks to lead the economic recovery in the state. We know because of COVID and coming out of the pandemic, that our economy has been greatly impacted. We believe we can do that through items such as our customized training division, our bio network, things that fuel jobs across our state. And then the reason that we're here today, the third pillar is to become a national model for diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. I asked President Stith for a quote to share with you all today. And this is the quote he shared with me. I won't read it all to you. You can see it there. But essentially, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important because in the educational field, because education becomes opportunity. Opportunity becomes success. And so we have a opportunity to have a strong impact if we are tapping into our diverse network of people, making sure there are equitable options for students, faculty, and staff across the board, and ensuring full inclusion. So this work actually began prior to President Stith becoming president of the community college system. On July 16th of 2020, our then community college system president, Peter Hans, who is now the UNC system president, issued a letter to create what he called the Community College President's Task Force to do a study of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues across the system. The goals were listed here to identify institutional or policy-related inequities, limiting opportunities for students, faculty, and staff, and make recommendations to address them, to specifically review our state board code, sample college policies that may be negatively impacting students of color, as well as to develop guidelines for colleges to use to examine their own policies going forward. He tapped two then community college presidents to lead this effort, Don Thomas, who was president at Southwestern Community College, and Thomas Walker, who was president at Wayne Community College. You may know that Thomas Walker is now at the UNC Pembroke campus. There were 5 community college task force members who were presidents. There was assistance offered by the system office staff. Ultimately, we hired consultants to conduct the assessment and study. Jobs for the Future won that contract and worked with our task force for a year, from summer 2020 to summer 2021. JFF issued their final report to the System Advisory Council on July 31st, 2021. Attached to that report was also a diversity, equity, and inclusion guidebook for community college use. Out of this report, the President's Task Force and System Advisory Council really honed in on 3 areas of recommendations. And I want to go back for a moment. So we talked about the President's Task Force. Their report then went to the System Advisory Council, which is a group of community leaders, some state board members, some community college presidents, and some community leaders, as well as some trustee members who make recommendations to our state board. So they made their report to the System Advisory Council. The System Advisory Council made their recommendations to the state board. So I want you to have a little bit of that context as we move forward. So the 3 key recommendations were around state board code provisions. There were 38 different provisions highlighted where JFF thought we could have better diversity or inclusionary language in our administrative code. Around the residency determination service, which, as you probably know, is a tool required by our state legislature to determine the residency of students in the state. This service determines whether or not a student gets in-state or out-of-state tuition. What we were finding is many students drop out, don't complete the survey for residency, in particular if they are undocumented, because that residency determination service documentation asks about family members. And so a lot of students would get afraid at some point and just stop. And then also around small debts, there is a rule that if you have any debt on your account as a community college student, your classes are dropped on the first day of classes. We found that as a huge barrier for someone who may have a $200 debt, who then gets all of their classes dropped. because they can't clear that debt. And there are other things we can do to clear the debt. The rules say that we can't use state funds to do it, but we could certainly use local funds and other funds to do that. So those were the 3 areas. And here the task force included rationale in their report for each one. Related to the residency determination service, it talks about it being a timetable for students who will be applying to one of the 4 UNC systems, but it's also used for community college systems, which what we need at the community college system is very different than what we need at the university system. And so that having the disparate impact among students of color and becoming a barrier to access to community college education. And then language related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our state board code. The rationale was without clear and definitive language, our goals and strategies cannot be implemented. Again, there were 38 places that they highlighted within the code. And then the guidance for community college strategies to eliminate student debt related to small fees. Obviously, that's a huge barrier and has a huge impact. So at the System Advisory Council level, these recommendations were boiled down a little bit more and refined a little more to talk about what the action would actually be. So the System Advisory Council asked that we review RDS processes and seek ways to mitigate the impacts. We shared this recommendation with our President's Association. We have several affinity groups related to community colleges. There's North Carolina Association of Community College Presidents, North Carolina Association of Community College Trustees. And the President's Association largely pushes forward our legislative agenda. And so we wanted the President's Association to take up this issue because the residency determination service is mandated by the legislature. And so we made that recommendation to the President's Association to include it within their legislative agenda and development process. And then for State Board of Community Colleges Code, again, this lives within the Legal Affairs Division as a body of law. So I am in the process of working with our Policy and Governance Committee to revise our State Board Code in those 38 highlighted areas. You'll hear more about a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant we're working with to also assist with that. And then related to the small debts, we recommended creating a working group of both college and system office staff to create some kind of written document or guidance for how colleges can eliminate these small debts for students. There were also some additional system office initiatives that we began January of 2022. We went to our state board and asked for funding for additional DEI assessment training purposes for our system office staff. Next month, we will be hosting racial equity training for all of our system office staff members through the Racial Equity Institute. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with REI out of Greensboro, but we'll be doing the groundwater training for all of our system office staff. It will also be optional for our board members, and we hope they will attend. We're also working with a DEI consultant to do an overall assessment of the system office practices and policies to help us with creating our new mission statement and to help us define the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion as we use them in our state board code. So that's one barrier that we've had to making the changes requested in the state board code is we don't even have working definitions across our agency. So the consultant is coming in to help us do that. Hopefully we'll have that ready by the end of spring 2022, early summer. We're also seeking to have a DEI certified leader on our staff. That person will be me. I'm getting my certification in diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we can always retain a DEI certified leader on our staff at the system office. And we're also looking into additional racial equity training for our senior team and management level employees. Everyone at our assistant vice president level and up would have access to more in-depth racial equity training. We're looking at either doing the 2-day phase 1 training at REI or some additional training through consultancy agencies. And we hope to do that by summer 2022 as well. So we have a really aggressive agenda for the first half of this year around our system office. I did not include a slide for our colleges, but I will tell you that we have a North Carolina Student Success Center for our community colleges. It's part of a larger national hub of student success centers. And it serves as a hub for shared learning, technical assistance, idea generation, and policy advocacy for community colleges to advance, scale, and sustain statewide student success and completion efforts. So as part of our Student Success Center, we employ 6 equity coaches across the state that do equity training at the community colleges for their faculty and staff. And we've heard really positive feedback from the faculty and the students about the impact of the equity coaches. So we have had efforts across our presidents, across our system office staff, as well as at our colleges related to DEI. And I like to think this is just our phase 1 approach. This is still first year for us to engaging in our DEI work. And I'm really excited about where we'll go in the future once we have our training and assessment in place. I'll pause now for any questions you may have.
Does anybody have any specific questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Dean Reimer.
Thank you very much. That was really great. I'm at the School of Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill, and we have had in one summer 40% of our faculty, staff, and students take the REI groundwater training, and the response was really positive. So I commend you on doing that. I think it's everybody has something to learn from doing that. I just wanted to communicate that I think the messages about diversity and inclusion in the system, as opposed to the community college system, are really mixed. I remember how hard it was for me to get a position as an associate dean for inclusive excellence. I mean, I had to go to the head of OHR at the university. It took about 6 months to get approval. That person was recruited by another university, and we've made an offer to somebody, and it's been sitting in at OHR for now more than 2 months. And it just feels to me like there's a lot of ambivalence and fear about what the schools that are really trying to do something are doing, and whether we're going too far. I don't want to put you in an awkward position, so I'm just going to say, I'll just communicate that to you.
Well, thank you for the comment, Dean Rimmer. And I will say that it is not without debate at any level.
That's an honest statement.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the 58 community colleges, all different places, as I stated, controlled by largely local boards. And so you think about what's happening in Pasquotank County versus Wake County versus Ashe County. Could all be very different.
Right.
And very different approaches for boots on the ground. I think our position in the system office is this is valuable work that we want to push forward as much as we can. But we know that it's a community effort. We can't do it all by ourselves. And so we hope by education that we encourage more and more people to join us in this work. But I do not mean to make it sound like it is all roses. It is not. It's,
well, you're a good role model, and I'm glad you're in the position that you're in. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my question was going to be, what have been your challenges in initiating? I mean, I know it's always helpful to have a task force to drive some of the work, but it sounds like their work was more related to some of your policies and procedures and that kind of thing. I don't know if there's any more that you want to say, Tawanda, and I also am not trying to put you on the spot, but if there's anything else you can say about challenges that you all have faced in doing this work?
So there are challenges, and sometimes they feel like they are many. I think the biggest challenge we have right now is education, and the fact that people do not always understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, why we believe it is important. We see this debate in the educational context around critical race theory right now, right? And how hotly that's being debated and contested in some places. I think those kind of debates are fueled by a lack of information and a lack of education. So one challenge is getting education in a way that persuades people. And of course, we know there are some people that are not going to be persuaded no matter what kind of education you provide. So then balancing how you move forward with that. I think the other challenge is what I was mentioning before, that we are such a diverse group of community colleges across our state. And because of the local control, we find that we are impacted in a lot of times by what local school boards believe, what local county commissioners believe. And our presidents have a fine balancing act, right, to work through what our state board and our system office advocates, but also not alienate their local support. Many of our community colleges, college presidents are hired under contracts that are governed by their local board. Either local board are governed by the school board, the county commissioners. And so it's a very fine balance for many of them. We've seen some colleges that have lauded their presidents for moving forward and some that have chastised their presidents. And so it is always that balance. I think the other thing that we probably can all agree to is our state is in a very polarized political state right now. And so I think that political overlay also at times can pose a challenge. This really is not political work, but people see it as political.
Secretary, this is Lydia. I have a question or a comment, or both.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Lydia Lavelle. I work at the law school at North Carolina Central, and I also, and my scholarship's around gender and sexuality, and I also recently completed 4 terms as the mayor of Carborough. And so I just have a couple of just quick comments. One is, along with Dean Reimer, yeah, I love the REI training, especially the one out of Greensboro, the groundwater training, because it's real. You know, sometimes diversity training is very surfacey, but that's really a great training, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. I had 2 comments. One was, I think you said something about you all were reviewing, as part of your duties there, you're reviewing either the code or rules or whatever around community colleges. I can't remember if it was the code or if it was making recommendations on statutory rules, but I just wanted to share with you that we in Carborough, during my last year or 2, we finally adopted a gender neutral code. We went through and redid all of that. In fact, we changed the name of our board from Board of Aldermen to Town Council. And anyway, it's all completely gender neutral. I wish that's something that we could do in all of our general statutes, but whatever you can do along the lines of that in your positions, I think it's really important to see that gender neutral language wherever we can, or suggest it anyway. That's one. And the other, and I'm sure this kind of maybe gets into the political part that you were referring to. Do you think there's ever going to be any appetite for making it easier for dreamers or non-documented folks to be able to go to community college as they once were able to? I mean, I know that's a political football, but just curious.
I think that will be determined by the political climate and what we see in the next election cycle, and probably the next 2 election cycles. I think I'll stop there. I think it will be politically driven. Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's something that I support, a lot of folks support, and I know it's tied up with a lot of other issues, but it seems to me if we want people who are living in our state to get the education they need to succeed, it's a kind of a no-brainer, but just wanted to throw that out there. So thank you.
Well, it is, and that's why the Residency Determination Service recommendation was so important, because what we see is even students that are documented, if they have undocumented family members, they're still afraid. And many times they're still barred from state tuition. And so the cost of community college is really great if you're in state. If you're out of state or deemed out of state by the Residency Determination Service, it's much more challenging.
Great, good point. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Tawanda? All right. Well, Tawanda, thank you for that presentation, and it really was excellent. And I'm grateful that you did the background piece because I learned a lot. I'm always learning a lot about community colleges, but I learned more today. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for taking the time today. I know you have a board meeting this week, and so this is a crunch week for you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Secretary Cashwell. I appreciate you inviting us again. My contact information is here. I'm happy to speak to anyone outside of this meeting as well.
Super. Thank you. Okay, next up, we have Daryl Bass with us, and Daryl is with the UNC System Office. He is the Senior Associate VP for Equity, Engagement, and Employee Relations with the University System Office in their Human Resources Division. And Daryl, if you take a minute to just tell us a little bit more about your background and then go into your presentation. You have the floor, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you so much for the invite, Secretary Cashwell and Evan. Really do appreciate that. Looking forward to our engagement. But I am an HR type. I've been in HR my whole professional career. I came to the system office from the Department of Transportation, where I served as their CHRO in their HR office. But prior to then, 28 plus years of HR, kind of grew up in state government, and then had a great opportunity to come over here to work in the UNC system. So that's pretty much my background. Worked in various functional areas, HR. Had an opportunity to work at DOT to set up the framework for Secretary Boyette's vision for their diversity and inclusion advisory council before I left. So that's kind of how I landed into this space. And I'm gonna see if I can share my screen here. So again, I do appreciate your time and the invite. And so I'm just gonna jump into it here. Can. Okay. So wanted to just talk to you about our racial equity task initiative and just give you an update of what we're doing. Last summer, a report was issued to our Board of Governors, and the report included an executive summary that provided like several initiatives that were highlighted as it relates to our racial equity task force. And one of them that we wanted to highlight was our creation of our Executive Leadership Institution. And that institute is comprised of like 24 members, and over half of them are African American. And what this does is it develops a diverse talent within the system, within the whole system, not just a system office. And then we also highlighted in that executive summary the adoption of some system-wide D&I metrics that were recommended from our D&I council. It's an advisory group, and those metrics were representation of student enrollment, faculty in terms of determining retention and persistent rates, looking at the same types of rates from a staff perspective. And then also graduate and undergraduate students, looking at first and second year retention rates, and then student success in terms of evaluating fourth, fifth, and sixth year graduation rates. Another initiative that was highlighted in that report was how the system and our president, the office of the president, strongly advocated for the inclusion of historically minority serving institutions of our North Carolina Fellows Program. And in that initiative, Fayetteville State University, North Carolina A&T, and UNC Pembroke was added to that fellowship program. We also highlighted student mental health initiative that began with strategies with support from a $5 million grant that Governor Cooper and his Emergency Education Relief Fund spearheaded. And so those were some of the highlights from the executive summary. And so in section 2, it gives you a background of how the Racial Equity Task Force was established, and it was established back in June 2020. Prior to me coming on board, I didn't come on board here at the system office until January 2021. And it was the Racial Equity Task Force was established to assess racial inequities in North Carolina public higher education institutions. And the intent of the task force was to build a culture of diversity and inclusion across the entire system. As you all know, as you may know, we've got 17 institutions across the system. We've got 14,094 faculty members. We also have 10,827 EHRA non-faculty employees. We also have 21,594 SHRA employees. And what I mean by SHRA is subject to the Human Resources Act, EHRA exempt from the Human Resources Act. And as I mentioned, the intent of the task force was to build a culture of diversity and inclusion across the system. And the task force identified 3 critical focus areas. One, dealing with students, with students as it relates to recruitment, enrollment, and outcomes. Also, one related to employees, focusing on recruitment, retention, and promotion. And last and certainly not least, safe and diverse campuses. And the task force recommended 6 overarching recommendations. And within those recommendations, there are 28 proposed action steps. And as I mentioned, I came onto the system in January 2021, and my job is organizationally aligned in HR, but I do also have a unique role where I do report also to the President Hans, and I do have full access to him as it relates to our DEI and B work. So that's section 1, and then section 2 kind of details all those different initiatives and recommendations. And as you see here, recommendations 1 through 6, recommendation 1 deals with diversity and equity staffing to support inclusion and belonging. Recommendation 2 deals with representation and retention at all levels of the university. Number 3 deals with data and accountability. And number 4, diversity, equity, and inclusion education. And number 5, programs and activities in support of racial equity and inclusion. And last and not least, campus policing. And then section 3 gives like a, and I'll drop this in the chat once I get off screen. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you'll be able to follow that. And 3 just talks about our process and some next steps. And to that point, the task force recommendations and proposed action steps represent a wide variety of functional areas across the system. And so we realized that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is not just HR facing. It is it crosses all of our departments, all of our different divisions, And so what we did was we assembled a team of subject matter experts across the system office, from academic affairs, student affairs, our HR, of course, communications, our compliance and audit services. We have representation there, safety and emergency operations, and strategy and policy, and our university advancement group. And we also established a group of co-leaders who work alongside with me in our division of student affairs group, our university advancement, strategy and policy, and our safety and emergency operations group. And we meet on a monthly basis to talk about the Racial Equity Task Force recommendations. And we've developed a targeted approach for assessment and implementing the plan. And so first what we did was we identified whether the proposed action step could be assessed and implemented at the system level or at the institutional level. And then secondly, for all the action steps, we've designated working group business partners, so to speak, and they come from the different departments based on that particular recommendation and action step. And then we also identified some system office staff as work group leaders who are responsible for helping lead or helping champion the efforts in those particular action steps. And the efforts include the following in terms of identifying initiatives that are already underway, because there were some things that were already underway, and Racial Equity Task Force and all the stakeholders who were involved in that really worked very hard, very passionate group of folks, but also assessing the feasibility and the costs associated with any potential new initiatives, and then establishing some deliverables and proposed implementation trajectories, whether it is short, mid, or long-term types of goals. And then, of course, next steps, we're committed to continuing to work with both the system office and the institutions across our system. And I mentioned earlier our D&I Council, and that's comprised of chief diversity officers across the system, and they provide advice to me as the president's designee as it relates to our D&I efforts. But we do have a decentralized business model as it relates to diversity and inclusion. So they're doing a lot of great work at the campus level. And so definitely want that to be recognized as well. And as I mentioned, we are continuing to engage with working groups across the system, developing implementation strategies and project plans. For example, in recommendation number 1, which talks about diversity and equity staffing to support inclusion and belonging, 1C is the actual step, proposed action step, and it's making available to all institutions the services of an ombuds officer that will serve as an independent resource to staff, students, and faculty. And so with that example, what we did was we sent out a survey to all of the CHROs, the Chief Human Resources Officers across the system, asking them if they had this type of role established on their campuses. And if they did have this role, did they serve staff, students, and faculty, or a combination of both? And what we found out was 7 out of 17 institutions do have that function. And so what we did was we decided to connect with those institutions, their CHROs, and their D&I council member on that campus to have discussions on how we could have this role functioning in their organization, talk about any barriers that might cause them to not being able to get this type of role on the campus, whether it be funding or support by executive management, and just had some real good discussions and helping them plan and really letting them know what this type of role could do on their campuses and how needed it is across the system. Another one of the recommendations is representation and retention at all levels of the university. That's recommendation number 2. And more specifically, the STEP talks about ensuring students of color are prepared to succeed by increasing financial aid counseling. And so what we did was we engaged with the financial aid directors across the system, asking if they have any programs and activities related to this particular recommendation. And we did find that 11 out of the 16 had some sort of activities in place that really spoke to this actual action step. And then, of course, we're working with the additional 5 that do not, to see how we can help with getting that type of information out. And then also action 2, building a high quality, diverse teacher pipeline for recruiting. We're engaged with our subject matter experts in our strategy and policy, our student and academic affairs division, working as relates to this particular action step. And, you know, as I mentioned, these are just examples. There's 28 proposed actions as it relates to the racial equity task force work that they've done. This one is recommendation number 5. It talks about programs and activities that support racial equity and inclusion. And you see it here. 5A talks about, best practices and innovations at the UNC system and the institutions. 5C talks about increased diversity of mental health staff and expanding access to counseling professionals to diverse backgrounds. And also, 5D speaks of integrating student support for mental health programming at critical student transition points, especially at the first year, and transfer students and those type of pain points for the targeting underrepresented populations. And this is another recommendation that this is another initiative that's related to recommendation number 5, I want to just mention. And it's referred to as our IMPACT program. It's our University System Math Pathways and African American College Transformation Program. And this initiative is designed to improve the performance of African American men in the gateway and entry-level mathematics courses, and increasing knowledge regarding the efficacy of different supportive practices in the African American male population for undergraduate students. And we've recently been granted a $600,000 grant to help out with this program. And this work is strongly supported across all the 17 institutions within the systems. And it definitely aligns with our UNC system level strategic plan, which we'll briefly touch on in a minute. Another one of the programs that we're very proud of is our Project Kitty Hawk, and it's designed to reach adult learners. And as you may know, the state constitution requires the benefit of higher education to be extended to everybody within North Carolina, all people within North Carolina. And access to higher education and relevant training, it can be challenging for working adults. I don't know if any of you have embarked on getting an additional degree while you're working full time. You know how challenging that can be. And so the Senate budget recently passed, and Governor Cooper appropriated $97 million for the launch of the Project Kitty Hawk, which is a nonprofit ed tech startup that will partner with our units, with our system and universities to serve adult learners. And I think President Han says it best. This is a quote from him as it relates to our Project Kitty Hawk program. And I won't read it to you verbatim, but in essence, he's just saying, it's time to address our obligation to adult learners and veterans of underserved communities and populations. And he, in essence, just saying it's time for us to stand up and embrace the idea that there's more than one path to success, and every person can realize this potential. And so this is a quote, and I think he said it way more passionate than I'm presenting it here today, but I wanted to mention that to you. So I mentioned earlier our strategic plan, and so we're in the process of doing a refresh of our current 5-year strategic plan, which expires this year. And we're working real closely with our policy and strategy and policy team. And our current plan focuses on access, student success, affordability, efficiency, impact, economic impact, and community engagement. And last and certainly not least, our excellent and diverse institutions. And so one of the potential refinements that we're working on in these areas of focus as it relates for excellent and diverse institutions is improvements in our employee experience across the system, faculty and staff mental health, mission-focused performance, and measures of diversity and inclusion. We're looking at how can we measure success as it relates to diversity and inclusion, and how can we do this not just at the system office but across the system. And so we're definitely continuing our work as it relates to our racial equity task force, our strategic plan, and just honing in and focusing more on some of our having more diverse institutions across the system. And that is pretty much what I would like to share today, but to also let you know that, as I mentioned, we did a report to our Board of Governors last summer. We're planning to do another report to give a little bit more detail on what we're doing and how things are going as it relates to our racial equity initiatives. And also, we're in the middle, where our institutions are in the middle of gathering information as it relates to diversity and inclusion to report to their Board of Governors. I'm not Board of Governors, but their Board of Trustees. And when they present that to the Board of Trustees, they'll be submitting that information to us as well as the system office. And so I've got my contact information here. If anybody would like to get in contact with me, and I will pause here to see if there's any questions that we might have.
So I'll start us out with questions. Thank you, first of all, so much for your presentation. Really appreciate it. I'm curious on the Racial Equity Task Force recommendations. How do you all track your progress? And do you maintain a dashboard that shows that? Like, how can the public see how you all are tracking your progress?
Right now, we don't have a dashboard. That is one of the issues that we're working on. I just started here a year ago, and so we are, we realize this is not a destination; it's a journey. That is something that we are planning to do. Right now, we have just an internal spreadsheet with some tables and some. That's how we're tracking it internally right now. But eventually, we will be able to have a dedicated site where this information could certainly be viewed by anyone. It's a great question.
So the recommendations are impressive, and I'm always looking on my end. I have lots of my staff are on this call. They know I'm always looking for how we actually accomplish the recommendations that come our way, and that's why I ask about the tracking. And so one of the things that you mentioned, I think it was recommendation number 1, that dealt with positions on university campuses related to DEI. And I may be butchering this, Daryl, but that was what I gleaned from it without having it in front of me, that it related to campuses establishing positions in this space. Am I right?
Yeah, I think you were speaking in reference to the ombuds officer role,
Okay.
where it's
It's strictly an ombudsman. I was thinking that it was something more, because I don't necessarily think of an ombudsman as doesn't have to be DEI. It can just be your troubleshooter, your person who is making sure that you're handling issues and public requests for information and complaints and that kind of thing. So I guess I was reading it in the context of the constructs of what the task force was trying to accomplish. And I'm raising it because I heard Dean Reimer say that they're trying to get a position at the School of Public Health that is in this DEI space.
Yeah, I wrote that down. I'm gonna check into
Thank
that.
you.
Good, good.
I wrote that down for you, Dean, remember, just to check in if
Thank
from a
you.
system
Actually,
office perspective, see where it is.
And we've had a position. We're just trying to rehire for it.
You're trying to rehire for the position.
Yeah, I mean, we went through all the pain of getting the position established. So this is just the person left, was recruited to be a vice provost at Colorado State, and we have a great candidate from Georgia Tech.
Okay. Okay.
But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Secretary.
No, it's all good. I'm in your corner. I'm trying to make this connection while we've got.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just really passionate about this. And, you know, I think so much of the work gets done locally. It gets done in schools and colleges. And it takes people to do it. And we've got a phenomenal Inclusive Excellence Action Plan. We're tracking it with real data on a variety of measures. And, but you know, you need somebody at the helm who's driving it. And you obviously see that.
Yeah, definitely. But Secretary Cashwell, did I answer your question? Because I think what I mentioned working with our CHROs and our diversity and inclusion members for those campuses who did not have that ombuds officer role and on their campus to see the feasibility of them being able to create such a role, either for faculty, staff, or students, or all the above, or a combination of each. And this particular ombuds officer would be working would be an independent individual. If individuals came to them, if they have racial equity issues, would be able to kind of map them through to resources and things like that. But I did mention that there are chief diversity officers across the institutions who serve on our diversity and inclusion council.
And that's probably what I heard as well.
Yes,
at any rate, certainly the goals
right.
And spirit of the task force recommendations certainly align with what Dean Reimer was trying to do. And so immediately I was like, wait a minute, this is a place where if what you're trying to do is help campuses, then you've got a situation where you can start working.
Yeah. Dean Reimer, could you put your contact information in the chat?
Yes, I will. Thank you. And thank you, Secretary and Dr. Bass.
Yes, ma'am.
Alicia has a question.
Good morning, and my apologies for being late. Since we are now a part of the quote unquote great resignation, we've seen a lot of it, especially in higher ed. I can say specifically in the division I work in, we're probably down well over 10 folks, probably closer to 20, and probably merging a lot of positions, and it's taking a lot longer to hire folks because of the whole processes that have been put in place. How can some of those processes be changed or revised or mitigated to help speed things along? Because we're really losing, I'll say, a lot of professionals that are from underserved and underrepresented populations that have really close connections to those communities.
Yeah, that is a we're all dealing with that. And we meeting our system office, where our senior vice president of HR shared some data to our board of governors as it relates to turnover, and it splices and dices it by demographics and gender and all of that. And so it's an issue that we're all dealing with, and I know from an HR perspective, all the CHROs, we've talked about it on our calls, and I do know that at the state level, Office of State Human Resources have created a task force to look at retention efforts, and some of our folks from the university are engaged with state agency HR directors on looking at strategies and sign-on bonuses and things like that will help retain employees. But CHROs across the system know that sometimes if you keep your hiring process is on a fast track, you can get individuals in the door a lot quickly. So they're looking at ways to improve that as well. So that's an excellent point.
Thank you.
Yep.
Alicia, I wish that is the magic question. I wish we had the perfect answer to that, because we're in all of the state agencies are just in a really critical place right now. I mean, I have positions that the legislature was wanting to take from us because they've been vacant for over a year, but we're constantly posting and not able to hire people. And whereas you used to get 20, 25, even I remember times getting over 100 applications, even 200 applications for a given position. Now we're lucky if we get 10. 10 is a lot for most of our positions if we happen to get 10. So yeah, it is really, everybody is facing that same sort of criticality, and I don't know what the answer is going to be. Certainly, I think at a minimum, we've got to pay state employees more. Like, that's just a base level starting point. Obviously, that's not the only thing. And I'd be interested in hearing from since we have university and community college folks on, about teleworking, and like whether teleworking is now just a given in your agencies, that's something that is, used to be the exception. Has it become the rule in your agencies that people are teleworking? So I'd love some feedback on that.
Well, I would say,
I'm sorry.
I would say that that's the number one question in interviews. And even before people get to the interviews, can I work remotely? And so we have here at the system office, of course, we've got people who work 100% remote because we consolidated 3 buildings into one. And so we're working out of one building. So we, of course, don't have a lot of office space for everybody. So we've got people who work remotely. Then we have some who are hybrid. And we've got some hoteling spaces where people can reserve to come in and work. And of course, roles like mine and others are 100% on site.
Mm-hmm.
So.
At the community college system, we have definitely felt the crunch of the Great Resignation as well. At one point, we were looking at 20 to 30% of our staff leaving. We also are what I would call a top-heavy agency, where people tended to come here and stay forever or stay until retirement. And so going into the pandemic, about 30% of our staff could retire within 5 years and have full retirement benefits. And so just being a very top-heavy agency meant that we also got a lot of resignations and retirements in a very short window of time. Our finance division is almost completely turned over. Almost everybody in our finance division is brand new. We're seeing that also in our IT division. I do think there are issues with being competitive, and flexible work schedules is one way that we do that. We are probably behind the curve and definitely not as advanced as UNC is with where they are we're also getting the question. And I've had people decline positions because of our telework policy. We did not have a telework policy prior to the pandemic. We started our telework policy probably 6 months or so ago, with permitting 1 day of telework a week. And then we moved up to 2 days of telework a week. So that's where we are right now. Is every employee is entitled to 2 days of telework each week. We definitely have the request for more than that, and for fully remote positions, especially in some of our IT areas, because we're also having a difficulty getting people geographically to even apply to our positions. So if we've got someone in South Carolina willing to do an IT job, we're also having to look at, can we get them the technology if they do not want to move to North Carolina, because we certainly can't pay them probably what they could make in the private sector. And so it's a huge issue. I think there's been some trepidation about how far to go with flexible work schedules because of our current political climate, and some agencies being afraid of losing positions or having their budget slashed in some way if they go to fully remote or authorize too much telework. And so I think it's a delicate balance. Alicia, I think I saw a question pop up and then it went away. So do you want to just come off mute and tell me what the question was?
For a lot of those finance and IT positions, are you finding that they're going to the private sector or to some kind of other competitive area for the community college?
IT positions, absolutely, because they can make double, sometimes triple what we can pay them at the state level. And so we've been doing a lot of advocacy around IT salaries, but then that also kind of upsets the cart with all your other employees who are not seeing those types of salary increases. Finance, I think we've seen a lot of movement to other state agencies with finance.
Well, y'all also stole one of my people from my budget office. So
Who did we steal from you?
Stephanie, shoot.
I know who you're talking about. Fisher? Is your last name Fisher?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Yes. Well, I apologize, but we're happy to get her. We definitely needed her.
she's very good. She's very good.
Thank you.
So Wanda, there's another question also from Julia. Those 2 days of telework, is that like a limited time frame, or is that a permanent change where now until forever people will have that option of 2-day telework?
We believe it will be a permanent change. When we first wrote the policy, the idea was it would govern through COVID. I think as COVID continued to persist, it's become a permanent change. We also have a kind of a telework exception, or that accepts in-person work for those who are high risk to COVID, and it requires medical documentation. And so those people are allowed to telework full-time until such time as we deem it's safe for them to return to the workplace. And that will likely be a temporary.
Thank you. I was curious how the community colleges were handling that regarding the permanent, because that's one question that I'm getting more from applicants and other people incidentally just wanting to know, is this just going to be during COVID, or is there a possibility of having some telework, permanently long term?
Yeah, I think as COVID persists, we're seeing that the landscape of the workplace has changed permanently, and to compete, we're going to have to change with it permanently. I think the geographic issue is going to continue to persist, especially when we look at the housing market in the Triangle right now, and what we pay people and the ability to even obtain housing in Wake County at this point. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I lived in North Wake County for many years, and then moved to Wilson County for about 4 years. Last year, I wanted to move back to Wake County. I ended up paying double for a very similar house to the one that I left in Wake County 4 years ago. And thank goodness I could afford to do that, but there are a lot of people who can't. And so I think the housing market is also going to impact how we allow state employees to work.
Okay, excellent discussion. Anybody have any other questions or comments for our guests? If not, I'm going to thank them and allow them to get back to their busy work schedules. All right, Daryl and Tawanda, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate both of you being here.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a good day.
You
You
too.
too.
Thank you. I enjoyed being with you today. Take care.
Thank you. Okay. Dean Reimer, hopefully something comes out of that.
Thank you so much. That was fortuitous. And thank you for your advocacy.
Of course. Okay, so we have on the agenda some priorities discussion and even potentially a breakout session. But before we go to that, since we've been talking about all these various HR related issues, that's the space we're in. Nancy, do you mind if I call on you for an update on some of the things going on in OSHR? Because I want us to make sure that we have time for that. If you are, I know you have all those things in your head all the time and know what the big topics are.
Sometimes a scary place, Secretary, but it is all, it's all in there. Yeah, I'll be happy to give you a quick update. So again, I'm Nancy A. Strike. I work with the Office of State Human Resources, and we always have a little something cooking at OSHR. Right now, a lot going on. So wanted to give you a couple updates on some of the major projects that we've been working on. Probably the most substantial thing that's come recently is a complete update to our total rewards and salary administration plans. So we have been working for quite a while with our team at OSHR, as well as external stakeholders and a consultant, to look at revising the statewide classification and compensation system. So I've worked with Daryl Bass, who just spoke for many, many decades, actually. And so when he described himself as an HR guy, it rang true to me too. But this is kind of how we approach this, and trying to build this framework and structure that supports salary equity in this system. And so at a recent State Human Resource Commission meeting, we took 6 new pay plans and a new classification system, and really sweeping updates to our pay administration policy for the state of North Carolina. And again, as Daryl had referenced earlier, this would impact employees that are subject to the State Human Resources Act. So some of the folks that we had talked about at community college campuses or exempt employees of the university system would not be impacted by these changes. But nonetheless, we have about 80,000 state employees that will see the results of these new programs and policies. What we've found within these revisions are very similar to some of the concerns that many of the members raised today. The Great Resignation and how we can keep employees, providing more flexibility to state agencies and universities and how they pay employees, while also trying to maintain a sense of pay equity. We really are emphasizing pay equity. And so sometimes those can be competing factors. The private market is not always an equitable market, and we certainly value equity within the state system. So the new pay administration policy addresses those concerns by essentially outlining a process that managers and supervisors and HR professionals need to go through when determining an appropriate salary. And there are several variables associated with that. So that was a big lift for the Office of State Human Resources. We're working with state agencies to implement that as the next phase. We're getting those new pay policies pushed out there, again, with those focus on both market and equity. And so we think we'll see some very positive outcomes from that. One component that was in that Daryl had referenced earlier as well, is the state has just revised pretty substantially our sign-on and retention bonus policy. That was approved by the commission the other week. And it gives a lot more options for evaluating sign-on bonuses and retention bonuses for employees. We really do think this is a great tool to help recruit and retain employees. Again, as a bonus, it comes out of what we call lapse salary. It's a one-time bonus. It can be paid over several months, but it's not recurring money like a salary would be. So there's certain funding options that are there that might not be there for a salary. But We do recognize that there's a lot of competition for talent right now, and we think this is another way to enhance both our ability to attract employees through sign-on bonuses and also to retain employees when we know that they have an interest in other career opportunities. So that policy is out and about now, and we will watch that very closely, but we do believe that it'll have a very positive impact and another potential for folks. So that was a big change for us. A lot of, again, work went into getting that launched and working with state agencies and universities, again, to get that implemented. The other two things, maybe three things that I would just mention very, very quickly to you. Of course, state agencies and universities are required by general statute to submit EEO plans to our office, and we're doing a lot of work with those EEO plans right now. This is the season for EEO plans. They're due to us by March the 1st, so we're well into that. We get 50 EEO plans, but they're very strategic and comprehensive documents. We appreciate all the work the state agencies put into those to look at both their data in terms of their representation and taking a look at where we can do better to diversify, as well as their programs and how they're addressing that. And so we hope state agencies view these as strategic documents that provide a pathway for moving forward. So we are in the review process right now with all of that and enjoying reading some of the really significant accomplishments, also best practices that state agencies are developing. We look forward to sharing those out. The third thing I would share with you is we just recently launched a new training for state employees called the Macro Impact of Microaggressions. And as somebody mentioned, it's a for real kind of training. It puts things right out there. I know we had talked about the groundwater training. This training is somewhat like that in regards to the fact that even experienced diversity and inclusion professionals like myself and many of you all, I went through the training and realized there's a couple things I needed to adjust as well. So it was a really great opportunity that one of the members of my team has put together and has started offering now. And so this is just another example in the broad umbrella. We've realized that training is really one of the key components to helping state employees develop the skills and resources they need to manage diverse workplaces. And so this is, again, just another part of that overarching umbrella of training requirements. And the last thing I would tell you is, again, we're working, again, in that education component really aggressively in terms of supporting both the governor's executive orders through proclamations and educating HR professionals through a series of 24 different education programs we have each year for state employees. For HR professionals that are state employees. We do everything from Black History Month to Women's History Month to National Crown Day to Women's Equality Day, and just the full roster of recognitions to help provide HR professionals an opportunity to have, again, that educational opportunity. Each of those events is recorded and put on the OSHR YouTube site so other state employees can enjoy it as well. But again, it's a multifaceted approach, both through policy, programming, and education to try to continue to push contemporary aspects of diversity and inclusion. So those are some of the highlights from OSHR that are going on right now. We have heard all the conversation about remote working, and of course, we have a very diverse workforce, and by diverse, I'm talking about occupationally diverse right now. We do have a lot of employees in the state workforce that remote work is just not feasible. Their job requires them to be on site. But for those employees who can have that flexibility, we're really supporting agencies with operationalizing for them ways that they can support remote work as well as flexibility in workplaces. So we know that is just something the state is going to have to offer. We need to offer that, obviously, in a very constructive way. So we continue to support that and work with that, while also recognizing, again, that we have this large contingent of employees that will not be able to avail themselves to those kind of programs. We have to continue to think about how we can attract and retain individuals that, just by virtue of their occupation, wouldn't necessarily have that type of workplace flexibility. So that's where we are. And Secretary, I'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions about any of that. But that gives you a flavor of the things that we're thinking about right now.
Nancy, thank you so much for that update. And I actually do have a couple of follow-up questions. You said that the policy on bonuses, which I know are for retention and sign-on bonuses, and that got through the commission last week. And you said it is now out and about. Does that mean it has been actually issued and we're able to start utilizing it?
So there already is a sign-on bonus policy there. So the revised policy, I need to double check with you, Secretary, if it's been published on the OSHR website. It has to go through the commission, and then it also has to be approved by the governor's office.
Okay.
And I believe we either have just got approval from the governor's office or are anticipating that any time now. But we will certainly let Dr. Adams know when all that is available and ready to be utilized. So there's a couple steps there we have to go through to dot all those I's and cross all those T's. But
Okay.
soon, very, very soon.
I
Yep.
want to make sure I didn't miss something when you said it's out and about.
I knew that was a little nebulous the way I framed that, because I was just thinking about, has it been approved by the governor's office, Nancy? Don't go too far. Get ahead of myself.
And then is the new the macro impact of microaggressions, is that on LMS?
Yes, ma'am. Yep, it's there. Yep.
Okay.
So,
Awesome.
yeah, we're very happy. It's a virtual platform right now, as we, like everyone, struggle with trying to figure out how to manage how to, getting 30 folks together in a room. But it's, I think you've met Gina Streety from the Office of State Human Resources before in this, and she does that training, and it's like I said, it's very eye-opening. Even those who think we're very aware, I was like, well, I probably need to rethink some of that a little bit. So
Right.
it's a great way to revisit the idea of microaggressions.
And then finally, we have been operating with a telework pilot program that is slated, as I recall, to end at the end of June. And I'm curious, I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of our department and coming up with, okay, what's going to be our plan now going forward? Because we've had a lot of people teleworking under that pilot policy and are like developing our way forward. Do you know if OSHR is going to be coming out with any guidance now, anything before the end of the pilot, or are you just going to be taking all the information that you get from the pilot and then later coming out with a policy, if you know?
I know that we're collecting data and information from state agencies and universities about how effective the policy's been. From what I've heard, they've been very pleased with the options. And so in terms of what the next step is, I would need to check, Secretary, to see, but I know there's a large interest, and we are aware that there's from OSHR employees as well, that these flexibilities be provided. So I know there is a path forward, but I can't tell you exactly where we're at in that in terms of how that policy will be handled as the pilot project begins to sunset.
Okay. Okay, that'd be great. It would be wonderful if OSHR kind of gave some guidance before,
Yeah. I'll make a note to share that with Linda as well, that's an interest of the commission.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? I'm not trying to dominate, but I got to take advantage of having Nancy, at my disposal. All those updates raise lots of questions in my head immediately. Anybody else for Nancy? Okay. And among the other awareness things of this month, sexual assault, this is also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Our Council for Women and Youth Involvement is often in the mode of spearheading the efforts around Domestic Violence Awareness Month and Human Trafficking Awareness Month and all those various months that we acknowledge and have programming around. Okay, so we are at 11:30. And we do have a quorum now, so I want to do a really quick backtrack just to keep us on administrative, on our proper administrative procedures. And I want to go back. I'm comfortable not necessarily doing a roll call, but we do need to approve the minutes. And so hopefully all of you had the opportunity to review the minutes. Oh, Alicia, you have a question.
I was going to make the motion to approve the minutes.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So we have a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a second? Dean Reimer has second. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns regarding the minutes? If not, we have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, if you can indicate, if you'll turn on your camera and raise your hand, I'm comfortable with us doing it that way. I know right now, if David Elliott is still on, he's thinking to himself, you're supposed to be doing a roll call. This is how I'm doing the roll call, is I'm gonna, if you can raise your hand if you are a member. Andrew, are you still with us? Can you say, give me an I or some indication if you're still with us that you approve the minutes? Okay, I see your hand. All right, excellent. I think that's all of our members. Thank you so much. So the minutes are approved. And so the next thing that we were going to do was talk about some of your priorities. We've had a number of presentations now. At the last meeting, you may recall that OSHR did a very extensive update on where we are, they are, but also as a state government, where we are in meeting the requirements of Executive Order 24, yes, that established this commission. And also we had a presentation as well. And then today, with discussion from community colleges and universities, our hope was that the combination of those two presentations would help us move to a place of like, where are the gaps now? Where do you all see? Because the point of this commission is for us to get your advice and counsel. And so where do you all see gaps in the work that we're doing across state government? And it looks like Lydia had to drop off. So, we can have a few minutes of this discussion today. I hate to have 2 meetings go by where we don't have any discussion about this because people tend to forget what the presentations were about. We don't need to do a breakout session, I feel like, but at the last meeting, I asked you all to think about this. And so I'm actually going to turn it over to Evan in case I've missed anything in that intro to let's spend 10 or 15 minutes. We have the time to see what you all are thinking in terms of any gaps. Evan, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you. And yes, that's actually a good background, just kind of considering the presentations from the last meeting in March and even the presentations today. Any gaps that you all continue to see, I know we still have the results that you all provided during the survey that we did. I want to say now it may have been October, about some of the initiatives and some of the priorities that you all kind of had individually, but just kind of opening the door now to discuss those as a group to see if there's things that, you all would want to recommend to OSHR or to DOA that can be looked into.
Well, and to add to that, areas even where you all feel like that the commission needs to do some work, and whether it is research or, work session to think about issues, just areas where it may be that you don't have the recommendation yet, but you feel like there are areas where we need some recommendations. And so I know it can take some time to develop recommendations.
I think for me, and I put it in the chat a while ago, is that especially now with younger professionals like myself, I am in the tech industry. I am a data scientist. So I don't have a actual recommendation that I have on paper that we can share. However, the biggest gap that we are seeing is the housing market. Right now, we have so many young professionals that just cannot afford to live in the big cities where our jobs are. Working remotely is crucial to us being able to be competitive in this industry. Being a Latinx woman is especially hard for my community and as a woman to be able to be competitive in these industries. Right now, I work for a nonprofit, and I'm literally making half of what I could make in the private sector because I see the need for us to be in these conversations where it is dominated by white males. And we can't be in these conversations because as a single working woman, I can't afford to live in Raleigh or Durham or even Charlotte. So housing and more remote options for us is going to be the difference between us as minorities being in these working and have diversity in all of these working sectors.
Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, and I'm making note of that here.
Anybody else? Dean Reimer.
Yeah, that's a really important point that Crystal made. And I think it's going to get worse. I'm struck that each agency, all of us in different parts of the universities, seem to develop our own tracking measures. And it takes a long time to do a dashboard, especially if you don't have the right data scientists, right, around. And I just wonder if there's some way in which we could bring together people and recommend a set of tracking measures that, would be, kind of the gold standard for tracking. I don't know if anybody would listen to us, but it just seems as though there are a lot of inefficiencies. And I see it in the university, and I'm seeing it even in today's presentations. And the other, I had two other comments. One is, Nancy, you've made really impressive presentations about training. And I want to know if we understand the proportion of employees in different categories that are receiving the training, and whether they're receiving follow-up training. Do we have that? And if not, is there a way this commission could help with that? So
Nancy.
two comments.
I was on the search for the mouse. Mission accomplished. Yeah. Hi, Dean Romer. We
Hi.
do, agencies can get that. All of our employee training goes through our learning management system, at least for state agencies. It's a little more complicated for the university employees, but on the state agency side, all of that goes through the LMS. And so we can complete a training record for employees and also get certain demographic and occupational information associated with those employees. So agencies can access that and take a look at who is getting some training. There's the two kind of flavors of training, as you know. We have the mandatory training, which folks
Right.
are never really excited about, but they generally always benefit from, and
Yeah.
then the voluntary training. And so particularly in the mandatory training, like the Equal Employment Opportunity Diversity Fundamentals for managers and supervisors, we track that very closely for completion rates and registration rates, and also looking at that demographically. So to your broader question, is it possible? The answer is yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some very good ideas. And, one thing that we could think about doing to your first point, we could think about getting somebody to do who presumptively has some good best practices on this. We can
Right.
look into that, both in the teleworking space and then also on the tracking and dashboards in that area. And I'll tell you, the reason I asked that question today is because as Daryl was going through his presentation, it reminded me so much of our work on the Andrea Harris Task Force, which had like 28 recommendations. I mean, and we had over the last year set up a structure that was very similar, where we had an agency. And Evan, I hope you wrote down what they were calling their agency person, but we had an agency who was assigned to each recommendation, or we assigned that over the last year. And then also a staff person. So you had the chair of, a subcommittee that had, each subcommittee had various recommendations. And then you had the chair of that subcommittee, and then you have a agency who is like the lead agency, and then also a staff liaison. And that allowed us to start moving that work along. But what we saw very early on is like, okay, well, how are we going to keep up with what everybody's doing? Because agencies are, pushing these things forward. And we did develop a dashboard internally that is just a tremendous tool and really helped us so much, because we send that dashboard out to the agency leads, and they're responsible for inputting on a regular basis, like, okay, where are you now on this particular recommendation, and what is the holdup? Do you have to have legislation? Do we have to have budget? What is it that we have to do, and like, what are the next steps? And it really helped us drive those recommendations tremendously once people could start seeing whether something was just sitting stagnant, or why is it sitting stagnant? Because there's some barrier. Well, we can't, one of their big recommendations was to pass Medicaid. Well, we can't pass Medicaid as a task force. And regardless of how hard we work, we cannot do that. And so, identifying things like that where, okay, that's going to require legislation. And so if you want to get Medicaid passed, you need to deal with that from electoral standpoint of electing people who are going to support passage of Medicaid. But there were so many other things like improving broadband and just some others in the community college space that really we were able to, thank you, Evan, popping up our dashboard. And this helped us a ton to be able to move those recommendations forward. And I cannot tell you, it really helped our task force members engage more. It helped us reset on what was important in many cases. And so it has really driven us in some ways, in some cases, a different direction. And in some cases, like, to even say, okay, we're done with this issue. We've done everything that we can do, and we're done with that issue. So this is one, and it's certainly a public document. So Dean Reimer, we're happy to share this with you. But my point in all of that is that we could see what others are doing as well in this dashboard space. And then to the extent that the commission has ideas about how that can be even improved upon, then we may develop, or you all may develop, a recommendation for here are some ideas about, to provide to OSHR, to provide to universities and community colleges of here's a way of setting up dashboards. I think that would be a tremendous tool to be able to provide input on. So
I mean, wouldn't it be nice to
we'll
see
work
North
on our end.
Lance, at least the public part of North Carolina? It would be
Yes.
really cool.
Yes. So let us see what we can, and if any of you know of entities that have done that well, whether it's corporate, government, maybe Replacements is doing this great, Andrew, or you're very tied into the corporate sector. If you know of someone who's doing that very well, be in touch with Evan. So we're always happy to bring in somebody to speak and do a presentation on some best practices in any area.
I appreciate that. And I mean, one of the things that I wanted to maybe lift up in this conversation is, I have had some understanding that some of the policies that the state has put into place, Nancy's office in particular. I think they have driven some conversations in the corporate sector, for example, about parental leave and doing some education around that. I went back to our HR people about parental leave as a result of our last meeting. But one of the other things I wanted to say is that I think that I do understand that some of the EO24 work has been impactful in terms of doing economic development. And, I think many of us think that this work is not just about economic development. I mean, that's not why we're primarily doing the work that we're doing, but it does have it provides an argument to economic developers about what we're doing in the state. And I think the more that we can have that in our sites, because it kind of talks to people on from different perspectives about the value of this kind of work. And so, because you say this leads to job creation in our state, which is something that is important. So that's not exactly well formulated, but that's, as we're having this conversation, that's some of the things I was thinking about.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. And I will tell you that one of the initiatives that we're working with the governor's office on now and Commerce jointly is to be better about on the front end of, when you talk about economic development, on the front end of bringing in employers in North Carolina is I'm going to use the word encouraging, but it's like really encouraging them and providing them tools to, for example, hire people who work in as hub vendors or women-owned businesses, or in our small minority women-owned businesses in North Carolina, to try to better drive them to the Googles and the Apples and all these businesses that are wanting to come into North Carolina. And we're trying to be more intentional about it by giving them, here are some businesses that are an example of the opportunities in North Carolina to help us build and drive economic development in rural North Carolina, for example. So,
That's really good.
so it's definitely something that the governor feels very strongly about. And you're right, it all ties in together. And I appreciate you saying that about the parental leave, because that is one of the things also that we've been trying to do, is share policies that the state has been doing and encourage not just private industry, certainly private industry, and that's part of the Lunch and Learn series that Evan is going to talk about also. But even with universities, community colleges, Council of State agencies, they're not required to follow those executive orders necessarily. And so we're trying to really push that out to say, look, this is working well. And I kudos to OSHR, because they've done a great job of tracking that information with respect to, for example, parental leave, and to say, look, everybody thought this was going to make, earth crash, but it didn't. And it's been very successful. So. Okay, well, we have a couple of good ideas. Anybody else have anything else that we're trying to formulate sort of where we're going from here? I feel like we've got a good next step to bring information back to you all. And again, if you will please think also about good places that that are doing this stuff well, to help Evan with getting some speakers lined up.
Okay, I think I'm out of mute. So I know I saw Andrew sign up. I'm not sure if I saw anyone else sign up for the upcoming Andrew Harris Task Force Diversity, Equity, Inclusion lunch and learns discussions over the next 3 months. The first one being this Friday, and then we'll have one May 20th and June 17th. And to Secretary Cashwell's point, what we're really looking at doing and where that spawned from is the business engagement group of the Andrew Harris Task Force was really interested in seeing what private industry was doing that mirrored what the recommendations of the Andrew Harris Task Force, so those 21 recommendations. But they were really interested, that business engagement group was really interested in getting these businesses on board, especially as we were starting to see new businesses come into North Carolina. And so one of the first things that they were looking to do, was to start kind of these conferences or conversations where businesses who are already doing some of this DEI work well could speak to businesses that find themselves struggling to incorporate these practices into their business. And a lot of those would either be smaller businesses who just can't find the bandwidth or the resources, or businesses, and as we've discussed, where there seems to be part of that dialogue where not everyone is on board, and it's how do you then have those conversations within your organization to really show the necessity of these practices as part of your business. So after months of trying to figure out how to put this together, we finally were able to coordinate and get a few people to assist us. And so we have the Department of Transportation, who jumped on board to volunteer. And then I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Kevin Price from the Institute, who's been very instrumental in a lot of the Andrew Harris Task Force work, a lot of the Hub Advisory Council work, and even the Retool work, who just kind of came in, volunteered, and said, hey, we don't know what role we can play, but we are really interested in being involved. And so now we put together these 3 sessions over the next 3 months. And really what I kind of wanted to propose to you all, and I put these questions in the email, and I can go ahead and actually copy them into the chat as well. For the last 2 sessions, so the session on May 20th, and I just put in the chat around internal diversity, equity, and inclusion training and employee business resource groups, as well as for June 17th, conversations around diversity, recruiting and hiring and on-the-job training. Any questions or anything that you would like to have that could be presented to the panelists on those 2 dates that we could have them have a conversation about, and particularly with the diversity, recruiting and hiring, we actually want to look at, what we've kind of coined as non-traditional diverse population, so that the formerly incarcerated population, the deaf-blind population, the neurodiverse population, so, individuals who may be on the autism spectrum or have other disabilities, where we try to figure out what are the practices to ensure that we are bringing in truly diverse candidates outside of what we kind of think is the visible diversity. Mm-hmm. And so is there any, and even if you don't have ideas right now on what are some questions that you would like to have asked, or what are some topics that you would like to bring up, feel free to email, text, call me at any time and just say, hey, I'm curious to see how these private companies are doing X, Y, and Z. Or if you know of a company that's doing any of this very well that could speak on the panel. Right now, the May 20th panel is full, but we might be able to add one more. The June 17th panel, we have a couple fillers out there and trying to lock down, but if you all know of anyone who could speak to those practices, and just kind of as an idea, we've reached out to like the Brian Hamilton Foundation, who does work with formerly incarcerated individuals to help them start businesses or find jobs. And then we've reached out to a few other organizations. Andrew, I actually have an email drafted to send you, because when Secretary Cashwell was like, is there somebody at replacements? I was like, let me email Andrew. So you'll get email from me soon. To see if you have any connections for June 17th, but also anyone else, if you know private industry partners that you may have, either their HR department, someone on their diversity, equity, inclusion council or office of DEI, feel free to let me know to connect with them. We hope June is just the start of really what we're doing. So DOA, as part of the Andrew Harris Task Force, we're hosting them for April, May, June, and we've been working with Commerce to then start kind of transitioning over to a program that they already have that's very similar to this. And so you really, all of our participants who participate in our 3 discussions will then be connected to Commerce to start getting involved with their discussions. So this will not end as far as these discussions. It's just through DOA and through the task force, we'll transition them over to Commerce. So if you still have people you think that would be good speakers for the state to be connected to, we can always funnel them over to Commerce to be a part of their larger DEI program in their Office of DEI over there. And so I'll leave that, and all of you have received the invitation to participate in the discussion panels. Like I said, Andrew, I know you signed up because I saw your name. I want to say, I think Christy, Ms. Foster signed up. I feel like I saw your name sign up also. But if there's anyone else interested in being a part of those, free to register at the link.
Okay.
Yes, this is Christy. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Thank
yes.
you. And
Okay,
I'm sorry,
I had to
Christy.
dial. Oh yeah, no worries. The hair is always different, so that's an easy mistake to make. Yeah, and I've attended some series that you had last year. I can't recall her name, but I attended a series where there was a blind attorney that was the speaker, and she was awesome. It was a great learning series, and she just talked about her experience in law school and trying to get jobs out of law school and the difficulties and challenges that she experienced, and even being an experienced and successful attorney, the challenges that she still deals with. So yeah, I've enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to attending the Andrea Harris Task Force meeting on Friday.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've hosted similar conversations. I actually did one for attorneys back in December, and a friend of mine, he's also a blind. He actually worked for me, and he was also a blind attorney, and definitely learned a lot through that experience of just kind of how you have to be conscious of a world that's made for sight-enabled people. It's made for people with 2 arms and 2 legs, and how we sometimes lose that. And so we even talked about, if you ever get together for a group lunch, and if there's someone who either on crutches or in a wheelchair, is the venue that you're meeting at accessible for everybody on the team? And it's things that we don't think about, if we are what we consider like able-bodied. And so it is always helpful to have those discussions around what I like to call kind of like the non-visible diversity sometimes, because we don't really think about that. Yeah.
Super. Okay, just a couple of quick announcements. We are definitely at the end of our time. We actually have 2 vacancies on the commission, and so I would love it if anybody has great recommendations for potential members. And keeping in mind that we would like to have a diverse commission. So poor Andrew is usually the lone male on most of our meetings, and so he'd probably love to have some companionship on here. So anyway, we're thinking through a diversity lens. Think about people you may know who would be great, have something to add to this group. I would really love it if you would send me some recommendations for that. And we have on the agenda that the next meeting will be May 18th, but I'm thinking let's push until June, because May 18th is going to be like a minute from now.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
The way time flies. And so we will send out the date for a June meeting. And I really still would love for us to meet in person. Dean Reimer, thank you for your willingness to host us.
Yeah.
But, once we saw that fewer than half of our folks were going to actually be in person, we just felt like it was sort of defeating the purpose. So I think let's give it a try again the next time, and we'll take a poll and see how many people can actually be there in person. And if we can get a majority of our folks there in person, then that would be awesome too. I'm not saying we have to do it every time, but it would be lovely to have an opportunity to see each other in person. And then maybe I don't make mistakes about calling out people who have been on the commission as if they are new. So again, I apologize about that, Christy. So
Evan, we're still happy to host. So if you just
thank you.
Thank you.
Do any of you have any announcements that you would like to make to the commission? Okay, super. Well, then thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. As always, thank you for your service to North Carolina, and we will look forward to seeing you the next time.